The Colorado legislative session kicked off Wednesday, and transportation was the word of the day in both the House and the Senate. Among the other words that made headlines were Speaker Crisanta Duran's comments about making the Capitol a safe place to work following the recent claims of sexual misconduct. Joey, you were there. I imagine awkward was another word of the day because it just had to be. You were there. What do we need to know about this first week of the session?
Well, it's all tied together. You know, that building runs on relationships, and right now there are a lot of frayed relationships in that building. Transportation, they've been frayed on transportation for a while. You know, we had Senate Bill 267 last year. They did put some money, I think $100 million, that they can leverage up to $2 billion over the next 20 years. But we had a whole special session on that, and nobody mentioned it in their speech. My colleague Marianne Goodland framed it as the flaming bag of poo that nobody wants to stomp on, so which has nothing to do with an S-hole. But, you know, transportation, both sides are spoiling for a ballot, but to take this to the ballot. You know, the Democrats are counting on the Denver Chamber of Commerce getting a sales tax on the ballot in the fall, but Republicans want to lock $300 million a year in the state budget and bond against it long term. And they'll have to take that bond issue, the permission to do that, to the ballot. So ultimately voters are going to decide this, but I don't know that legislators are going to be able to decide this. You know, the Republicans want that in the Senate, which just means that the Democrats who lead the House are going to kill it. Anything that the House puts out, which I don't think they're going to put out anything on transportation this year, it's just going to get killed in the Senate. So where does that leave us? Sitting in a traffic jam.
Sadly, I think you're very prescient on that one, Joey. I think you're right. Penn, a split legislature, an election year, a governor he's not a lame duck governor yet, but he's awfully darn close. Is anything going to get done this year?
He's a lame duck governor. We need to go ahead and say it. It's happened. Things are going to get done, but I don't think the big issues are going to get done. And Joey's right. The place does run on relationships, and I visited for a while today for some of the MLK ceremony and everything. And what I found fascinating was how the mood is impacted both in the chamber and in the lobbies. People interact with each other differently. It's a very stilted feeling because people are careful about what they say and what they do. And to a certain level, that's appropriate. I mean, you ought to mind your manners, but it's minding your manners on overdrive. And that doesn't make for good legislating because the conversation is stilted and sometimes it isn't candid or clear enough in terms of where you want to go. And at the end of the day, the problem with the transportation situation is Republicans in the Senate want one thing, Democrats in the House want another. I don't see them coming together to reach a compromise because that's a campaign issue. And the chamber may push something that gets on the ballot, but I'm not convinced what they push is going to fly with the public. They've had this habit recently of pushing these various initiatives that just don't resonate with the community because we've talked about people feeling dislocated and displaced because of gentrification and because of development happening to them, not for them. If the chamber's not careful, that's how a transportation initiative is going to be perceived.
Seems like the chamber would take some good lessons from the whole Green Roof Initiative.
Well,
I don't want to call it a
go.
fiasco, but
Yeah.
that blew up in a variety of faces in Denver just this last fall. Michael, do you think you're going to see anything of substance come out of the session? And if it doesn't, we can talk around here. We think it's an election year. We're cynical about it. But if nothing comes out, does that come back on Hickenlooper, or is that just politics? People understand that.
I think it's politics. I agree that probably not much will get done. The two big issues, para being one and transportation being another. Para, I don't really see. I mean, there's a lot of bills out there. There's a lot of people talk about it, but I don't think anything actually gets done. Transportation is an interesting one, and I think the dynamics have shifted a little bit. I think if you look at it, so the budget went up $2 billion this year. Governor Hickenlooper comes out with his budget, and then $250 million more comes in after tax reform happens. And Governor Hickenlooper said 150 of that should go to transportation. The Republicans, as Joey mentioned, want $300 million to go to bonding for this. But I think the dynamic of that conversation has changed because in years past, the Republicans have said, prioritize the budget. And then the question back to them is, where do you cut? Well, now the money is there. And the Democrats last year had said, we need a new source of revenue. Well, the revenue's sitting there. It just came in. And so I think really the Democrats have lost the media on this. At the time, the tax increase was losing 57% were against the tax increase when they did polling. That was with the media on board. That was with everybody at the legislature on board. I think now the media is going back to the Democrats and saying, okay, the money's there, why aren't we moving on this? And so I think if there is a ballot issue, if the chamber pushes one, it'll lose by even more than that amount.
Patty, what have you seen? We have seen and talked about and been both cynical and optimistic about a lot of sessions. Are you cynical or optimistic about what we've seen so far?
Well, amused, I have to say, because I went to a legislative event on Wednesday, and when Penn talks about awkwardness, you haven't seen anything like it. I mean, like handshakes that were 10 feet apart, no hugging, except maybe a couple women would hug each other just because it was funny. People are just acting unbelievably stiff, and I would say stupid. You know, it's pretty simple what to do. Do not be a shoal. Do not treat people horribly. Be a professional, be a pro. Don't worry about what gender someone is. Just treat them like a professional. It's shocking that it is still such a problem in 2018 at the Colorado legislature. So if they can get beyond that, this means no closed door negotiations, because who knows what could happen behind closed doors. And without closed door negotiations, I don't know if they'll be able to do these tough deals.